When I accepted that waltz in front of 300 people, I had no idea I was about to shatter the life I'd spent 10 years carefully constructing. The man who challenged me thought he was about to humiliate a nobody. Instead, he unlocked a truth that would silence an entire ballroom and change everything I thought I knew about myself. But let me take you back to the beginning, because what happened that night at the plaza didn't start with a dance. It started with a choice I made a decade ago, one that buried my dreams so deep I convinced myself they were dead. The crystal chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom cast a golden glow across the polished marble floors, making everything shimmer like we were inside a jewelry box. I moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, my black and white server uniform marking me as part of the background, someone the guests' eyes would slide right past without really seeing. In my hands, a silver tray balanced 12 champagne flutes, each one worth more than I made in a day. The Children's Arts Foundation annual benefit was in full swing. 300 of Manhattan's elite packed the ballroom, dripping in designer gowns and custom tuxedos. Diamond earrings caught the light with every turn of a head. Rolex watches glinted on wrists that had never known a day of real work. The air smelled like expensive perfume, fresh flowers and money. Always money. I'd been working events like this for 3 years now, ever since I landed the job with Premier Catering Services. The pay was decent, the tips could be incredible if you smiled right and stayed invisible, and most importantly, the schedule was flexible enough that I could work my other 2 jobs: morning shift at Starbucks in Midtown, afternoon coverage at a boutique hotel front desk in Chelsea, and then these evening events when they came up. 70-hour weeks were my normal. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, not with rent in Queens and the mountain of medical debt that still followed me like a shadow. "Rebecca, table 12 needs a refresh," whispered Brianna, my friend and fellow server, as she passed me carrying a tray of canapés. Bri had been my lifeline since I started this job. She was the only person here who knew anything real about me, though even she didn't know everything. "Got it," I murmured back, adjusting my tray and heading toward the cluster of guests near the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking Central Park. That's when I first saw him. Nathaniel Ashford III stood in the center of a small crowd, commanding attention the way only certain people could. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair swept back in that effortlessly perfect way that probably took half an hour and $100 worth of product to achieve. His tuxedo was custom Armani, I'd guess. His shoes alone probably cost more than my entire month's rent, but it was his posture that really gave him away. Shoulders back, chin slightly raised, the physical embodiment of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. I recognized him from the society pages that guests sometimes left behind at the hotel. Nathaniel Ashford III, heir to the Ashford Properties empire, one of the biggest commercial real estate holders in Manhattan, worth somewhere north of $800 million, according to Forbes. 35 years old, and never worked a real job in his life. Just shuffled money around and showed up at charity events to be seen. Next to him stood a woman who looked like she'd been carved from ice and dressed by a team of stylists. Vanessa Montgomery, if I remembered correctly. They'd gotten engaged 6 months ago, a match that had made the social pages for weeks. She wore a silver gown that probably cost more than I'd made all year, and her neck dripped with diamonds that caught the light like frozen fire. I kept my head down and approached their circle carefully, waiting for a break in conversation to offer fresh champagne. One of the golden rules of high-end catering: never interrupt, never make eye contact unless invited, and always, always stay invisible. "The Tribeca project is going to triple its value in 18 months, Nathaniel was saying, his voice carrying that particular blend of confidence and condescension that came from never having to worry about being wrong. "Anyone who didn't get in on the ground floor is going to be kicking themselves. Nathan, darling, not everyone is as brilliant with investments as you are," Vanessa purred, touching his arm with fingers so delicate they looked like they'd never held anything heavier than a wine glass. I saw my opening and stepped forward, tray extended. Champagne? Nathan turned, and for a split second, our eyes met. His were a cold gray like winter clouds. Then his gaze slid right through me, already dismissing my existence as he reached for a glass. But his hand moved at the same moment I adjusted the tray to compensate for the weight shift. His elbow caught my wrist, not hard but enough to jostle the tray. One of the champagne flutes tipped, and though I caught it before it fell, a few golden drops splashed onto his sleeve. Time seemed to freeze. Nathan looked down at his arm, at the tiny wet spots darkening the fabric of his Armani tuxedo jacket, and his expression transformed from indifference to fury in less than a heartbeat. "What the hell?" he snapped, jerking away from me like I'd burned him. "Watch where you're going." "I'm so sorry, sir," I said, immediately, setting down my tray and grabbing a napkin from a nearby table. "Let me—" "Don't!" he cut me off, as I reached toward his arm with the napkin. "Just don't touch me. You've done enough." Heat flooded my cheeks. Around us, conversations had stopped. People were staring. Vanessa looked at me with the same expression someone might reserve for something unpleasant. They'd stepped in on the sidewalk. "I'm very sorry," I repeated, keeping my voice low and professional even as shame burned through my chest. "It was an accident. If you'll allow me to—" "You people need to be more careful," Nathan interrupted again, his voice loud enough that I knew others could hear. "This is a $5,000 jacket. Do you have any idea what that means?" "Of course you don't. You people." The words hit like a slap. "Not you, just you people. The ones who serve. The ones who don't matter. The ones who are so far beneath notice that when they finally are seen, it's only as an inconvenience." I felt something crack inside my chest, but I kept my face neutral. Years of practice had taught me how to take this kind of thing and swallow it down. "Again, I apologize, sir. I'll inform my supervisor." Nathan was already turning away, waving his hand dismissively like he was shooing away a fly. The crowd around him murmured sympathetically, their attention already moving on. The moment was over for them. Another minor annoyance in their perfect evening, already forgotten. I picked up my tray with shaking hands and walked toward the service hallway, feeling the weight of humiliation pressing down on my shoulders. Behind me, I heard someone laugh. Probably at a joke that had nothing to do with me but felt like it did. "Hey!" Brianna appeared at my elbow as I pushed through the kitchen doors. "You okay?" "That was brutal." "I'm fine," I said automatically, setting down the tray harder than I meant to. A few of the remaining glasses rattled. Just another night in paradise. "That guy's a total asshole. Everyone knows it." Bree touched my arm gently. "Don't let him get to you." "I'm not." I lied. "Really, I'm okay. I just need a second." I ducked into the small staff bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. Same face I saw every morning. Brown hair pulled back in a tight bun, no makeup except for a touch of mascara and lip gloss. Nothing that would draw attention. 28 years old, but I looked older, especially around the eyes. Tired. That's what I looked like. Tired and small and insignificant. "You people." I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. My mother's voice echoed in my memory, soft and warm like sunlight. "Never let anyone make you feel small, sweetheart. You carry music in your bones and grace in your soul. That's worth more than all their money combined." But she'd said that 10 years ago, back when I still believed it. Back before cancer ate her alive and left me drowning in medical bills and grief. Back before I learned that grace and music don't pay rent or keep the lights on. I opened my eyes and straightened my shoulders. 20 more minutes and this shift would be over. I could handle 20 more minutes. I'd handled worse. What I didn't know was that in less than an hour, everything I'd buried for 10 years would come flooding back, and the entire ballroom would witness the moment my carefully hidden past collided with my present. I returned to the ballroom just as the evening's program was beginning. A small stage had been set up at one end of the room, with a microphone and a podium. The guests were finding their seats at the round tables scattered across the marble floor, settling in with their drinks and desserts. The executive director of the Children's Arts Foundation, an elegant woman in her 50s, named Patricia Wilmot, took the microphone first. She spoke about the foundation's mission, about bringing music and dance education to underprivileged children across the city, about the programs they'd funded and the lives they'd changed. I stood against the wall with the other servers, waiting to be needed, half listening to words I'd heard 1,000 variations of at events like this. Then Patricia introduced the evening's biggest donor, and my stomach clenched. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Nathaniel Ashford III, whose generous contribution of $500,000 is making this year's expansion possible. The ballroom erupted in applause as Nathan stood and made his way to the stage. He moved with that easy confidence again, waving to acknowledge the crowd like a politician. When he reached the microphone, his smile was wide and camera-ready. "Thank you, Patricia. Thank you all for being here tonight." His voice carried clearly through the sound system. Supporting the arts has always been important to the Ashford family. We believe that every child deserves access to beauty, to culture, to the transformative power of creative expression. I watched from my place against the wall, feeling something bitter curl in my chest. It was easy to talk about beauty and transformation when you'd never had to choose between dance lessons and dinner, between following your dreams and keeping your mother alive. Nathan continued his speech, talking about investment in the future and cultural enrichment, using all the right words that meant nothing coming from someone who'd never struggled for anything in his life. The guests listened with rapt attention, nodding along like what he was saying was profound instead of just well-rehearsed platitudes. Then something shifted in his demeanor. His speech was winding down, but instead of returning to his seat, he paused and glanced around the ballroom with a strange gleam in his eyes. "Actually," he said, and there was something in his tone that made my skin prickle with warning, "before I step down, I'd like to make this evening a little more memorable." Uncertain laughter rippled through the crowd. Vanessa, seated at a front table, tilted her head with an indulgent smile, like Nathan was a clever child about to perform a trick. Nathan's eyes scanned the servers lined against the walls, and my heart started to pound. "Don't look at me," I thought. "Please don't look at me." His gaze landed on me and stopped. "You," he said, pointing directly at me, "with the champagne tray earlier. Come here." The air left my lungs. Every eye in the ballroom turned to me. I felt pinned in place, like a butterfly on a collector's board. "Come on, don't be shy," Nathan said when I didn't immediately move. His smile was friendly for the crowd, but I could see the cold calculation in his eyes. He wasn't done punishing me for the champagne incident. "What's your name?" I forced my feet to move, walking toward the stage on legs that felt like they might give out at any second. The distance from the wall to the podium felt like miles. 300 faces watched me cross that marble floor, their expressions ranging from curious to amused to vaguely uncomfortable. "Rebecca, sir," I managed when I reached the stage, my voice barely carrying through the room. "Rebecca," Nathan repeated, like he was tasting the word. "Tell me, Rebecca, do you know how to dance?" My heart stopped. The question hung in the air like a blade. Scattered laughter came from the tables. Someone called out, "This should be good." I'm working, sir," I said quietly, hating how small my voice sounded. "Oh, come on," Nathan's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Surely you have some moves. Everyone can dance a little, right? Tell you what." He paused for dramatic effect, making sure every person in the room was paying attention. "If you can waltz with me right now, here in front of everyone, I'll donate an extra $50,000 to the foundation tonight." The ballroom erupted. "Oh!" gasped the crowd. People leaned forward in their seats. Vanessa covered her mouth, her eyes bright with anticipated entertainment. But Nathan wasn't finished. "However," he continued, his voice dropping into something that sounded almost kind but wasn't, if you stumble or can't keep up, you have to admit something. You have to admit that some people are born for the spotlight." He gestured to himself, to the glittering crowd. "And others, well, others are born to serve." The words landed like stones. The laughter in the room took on an edge. Uncomfortable now. A few people shifted in their seats, but most just waited, eager to see how this would play out. I stood there, on that stage, feeling like I was drowning in front of 300 people. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to refuse, to preserve what little dignity I had left. But then I heard it. My mother's voice, clear as day, like she was standing right beside me. Dance with your heart, not your feet, sweetheart. My hands stopped trembling. Something shifted inside my chest. A locked door beginning to crack open. I looked at Nathan Ashford III with his designer tuxedo and his cruel smile and his absolute certainty that he'd already won. And I made a choice. I accept, I said. For just a second, genuine shock flashed across Nathan's face. He'd expected me to refuse, to run, to prove his point, by default. He'd expected the working-class girl to know her place. He hadn't expected me to fight back. But what Nathan Ashford didn't know was that in less than 5 minutes, I was about to shatter every assumption he'd ever made about me, and the truth I'd been hiding for 10 years would finally devastatingly come to light. The orchestra leader looked confused, glancing between me and Nathan like he wasn't sure if this was actually happening. Nathan recovered quickly, his smile snapping back into place like a mask. "Wonderful," he said, playing to the crowd. "Let's give Rebecca a round of applause for her bravery." The crowd clapped, but it was the kind of applause you'd give a child about to attempt something beyond their abilities. Polite, patronizing, already anticipating failure. Nathan descended from the stage and approached me, holding out his hand. "A waltz, maestro," he called to the orchestra leader. "Something classic. Strauss, perhaps?" The orchestra leader nodded, raising his baton. The musicians lifted their instruments. I could see some of them exchanging glances, unsure about this whole situation, but too professional to refuse. Nathan's hand closed around mine. His other hand went to my waist, gripping firm and controlling. He was tall enough that I had to look up at him, which I'm sure was part of his intention. Make the little server crane her neck. Reinforce the power dynamic. "Just follow my lead," he murmured, low enough that only I could hear. "Try not to embarrass yourself too much." The first notes of the Blue Danube floated through the ballroom. That famous Viennese waltz that every child knows. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The rhythm as familiar as breathing. Nathan moved, stepping forward to lead. Confident and practiced. He'd probably taken ballroom lessons as a child, the kind of expensive instruction that came with prep school education. His frame was decent, his posture good. He knew what he was doing. What he didn't know was that I knew too. My feet responded automatically, muscle memory firing from years of training that had never really left me. My left foot stepped back in perfect time with his forward step, my body turning exactly as it should. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But I kept my movements small at first, conservative, following but not shining. Years of staying invisible had taught me how to hide, and some instinct made me hold back. Not yet. Not yet. The crowd watched with mild interest. A few people were already pulling out their phones, probably expecting to capture my inevitable stumble, the moment when the server proved she couldn't keep up with her betters. Nathan led me through a basic box step, then a simple turn. His grip on my hand was too tight, meant to control, to reinforce who was in charge. His expression was smug, probably already planning his little speech about knowing one's place. We moved across the floor, and something began to happen inside me. The music swirled around us, the orchestra playing with the kind of practice perfection that only comes from years of training. And suddenly, I wasn't in the Plaza Ballroom anymore. I was 12 years old, standing in a sunny studio with worn wooden floors, and my mother was guiding my steps. "That's it, sweetheart. Feel the music. Don't just count the beats, let them move through you." My eyes closed for just a second. When they opened again, something had changed. My shoulders straightened, my frame solidified. When Nathan led me into the next turn, I didn't just follow, I matched him, my feet finding the floor with precision that made our steps sound like one person moving, instead of two. I felt Nathan's grip on my hand shift slightly. Surprise, maybe. His frame tensed. The music swelled, the violins climbing higher. We moved into a promenade position, and when I placed my foot, it was exactly on beat, exactly on balance, with exactly the right amount of weight. From the crowd, I heard someone say, "Wait, is she actually good?" Another voice, "Look at her feet. Those aren't beginner steps." Nathan heard it too. I felt him stiffen, his jaw tightening. He tried to lead me into a more complicated sequence, probably hoping to throw me off. An outside turn followed by a reverse. The kind of combination that requires both dancers to know exactly what they're doing. I followed perfectly. More than that, I anticipated. My body knew what came next before his hand even signaled the movement. I'd done these steps 10,000 times. They were written into my bones and blood, pressed into my muscle memory so deep that 10 years away hadn't erased them. We turned, and my skirt flared out just slightly. In my sensible catering uniform, I probably looked ridiculous next to Nathan in his expensive tuxedo. But I wasn't thinking about how I looked. I was thinking about how it felt. It felt like flying. It felt like my mother was dancing with me, her hands over mine, her voice in my ear. "Let go, Rebecca. Stop thinking. Just dance." The music shifted, building toward the crescendo. The waltz was reaching its emotional peak, the place where the dancers usually displayed their most impressive work. Nathan tried to lead me into a spin, his hand pushing my back to signal the turn. But something in me rebelled against being led anymore. I went into the spin, but I controlled it. One perfect rotation, my head spotting to avoid dizziness, my arms holding their frame, my foot finding the floor at exactly the right moment to stop. When I came out of the turn, it wasn't Nathan who dictated where I went next. I stepped into him, my momentum carrying us both into a sequence that I initiated. His eyes widened. For the first time, Nathan Ashford III was following me. The crowd was no longer just watching politely. They were sitting forward in their seats. The phones had gone up, but now they were recording something different than a failure. They were capturing something they hadn't expected. I could feel it building in my chest. 10 years of locked-away passion breaking through the walls I'd built around it. Every step was a word I hadn't spoken. Every turn was a grief I'd carried silently. Every movement was a memory of my mother, of her grace and strength and love. The music soared. We moved across the floor in a traveling sequence. And now I wasn't even thinking about the steps. They just happened, like breathing, like my body remembered how to speak this language even though my voice had been silent for so long. Nathan was sweating now. I could see it beating on his forehead. He was a competent dancer, but he'd never trained like I had. He'd never lived dance the way I had. And he certainly had never danced through grief and loss and love so deep it felt like it might shatter you. We approached the final section of the music, that last dramatic flourish before the closing notes. There's a traditional lift in the Blue Danube, something showy that dancers do to end on a high note. Professional, trained dancer. Nathan wouldn't try it. He couldn't. He didn't know I could do it. But I did. As we came into position, I signaled my readiness with the slightest shift in my frame. Nathan felt it, and shook his head almost imperceptibly. No. Too risky. Too much. I didn't ask permission. As the music peaked, I jumped. Just a small lift, nothing too dramatic, but enough. My hands pushed against his shoulders for leverage, and his training kicked in automatically. He caught me at the waist, lifting just enough that my feet left the floor for a brief, perfect moment. The crowd gasped. We landed together perfectly on beat, and flowed immediately into the final sequence. 3 more measures, 2 more turns, and then the pose. Nathan and I stood frozen in the classic waltz ending position. His hand at my back, mine on his shoulder, our bodies creating the elegant line that the dance demanded. The final notes of the orchestra faded into silence. For one heartbeat, the ballroom was completely still. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then someone started clapping. Just one person, in the back. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on their feet, applauding. Not polite charity applause. Real, genuine, thunderous applause that echoed off the marble and crystal and made the chandeliers chime softly. I stood there, still in Nathan's arms, and felt hot tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness, tears of release. 10 years of holding everything in, of being small and invisible and silent, and suddenly I couldn't hold it anymore. Nathan released me like I'd burned him, stepping back with an expression I couldn't read. Shock, maybe, anger, embarrassment, all of them at once. But I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was looking at my hands, at my feet, at the space around me that suddenly felt bigger than it had in years. I'd done it. I danced. For the first time since my mother died, I'd actually danced. The applause continued, and people were standing, some of them with tears in their own eyes. A woman near the front was gripping her partner's arm, her mouth open, in amazement. A man in his 60s was nodding slowly, like he understood something he couldn't quite put into words. And then from the back of the ballroom, an elderly voice rang out, clear and strong. Ladies and gentlemen, I must interrupt. The applause faltered and died. Everyone turned to look at the source of the voice. An old man was standing, tall despite his age, with thick white hair and a tuxedo that looked like it had been tailored decades ago, and maintained perfectly ever since. I recognized him immediately, and my heart stopped for the second time that night. Professor William Hartley. Dance Theory and History. Juilliard School of Music. One of the most respected teachers in the entire field. And someone who had known my mother very, very well. That young woman, Professor Hartley said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom, is no ordinary server. No, no, no. My chest constricted. This wasn't supposed to happen. Nobody here was supposed to know. I'd been so careful for so long. The professor walked forward slowly, leaning on a cane, but moving with the deliberate grace of someone who'd spent their whole life teaching movement. She is Rebecca Hayes, daughter of Grace Hayes. The name dropped into the ballroom like a stone into still water, and I watched the ripples spread. Confused faces, people looking at each other, someone whispering to their neighbor. Then realization, dawning in waves. Grace Hayes? A woman's voice called out. The Grace Hayes? Yes, said another voice, and I turned to see a second person standing. An elderly woman, Asian, elegant, with silver hair styled in a perfect chignon. Margaret Chen, Maggie. She'd choreographed 3 of my mother's most famous Broadway performances. Grace Hayes, Maggie continued, her voice thick with emotion, was one of the finest dancers this city has ever produced. Juilliard prima ballerina. Broadway star, she performed at Lincoln Center, at the Met, she danced for presidents, and Maggie's eyes found mine across the ballroom, and in them I saw compassion and understanding and a grief that matched my own. And she died 10 years ago, far too young, leaving behind a daughter who inherited every ounce of her gift. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Heads turned to stare at me. Phone cameras swiveled in my direction. I stood frozen in the center of the floor, feeling naked and exposed. All my carefully constructed invisibility shattered in the space of 30 seconds. Nathan stood beside me, his mouth slightly open, his expression cycling through confusion, realization, and something that might have been horror. Professor Hartley reached the edge of the dance floor. I'd recognize those movements anywhere, Rebecca. Your mother taught you well. That wasn't just training. That was artistry. That was soul. My voice cracked. I tried again. I can't. You can, Maggie said gently, approaching from the other direction. You just did, child. Everyone here saw it. Tears were streaming down my face now, and I couldn't stop them. Couldn't stop any of it. The secret I'd kept for 10 years, the identity I'd buried with my mother, was exploding into the light in front of 300 strangers. But what Nathan Ashford and everyone else in that ballroom didn't know yet was the whole story, the truth about why I'd walked away from this world. And I was about to tell them everything. I looked around at all those faces, at the expensive clothes and jewelry, at the world of privilege and comfort that my mother had once been part of. Then I looked at my uniform, at my sensible shoes, at the hands that had been holding a serving tray 15 minutes ago. A microphone appeared in front of me. I don't know who brought it, but suddenly it was there, and everyone was waiting. I took it with shaking hands. "You're right," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "I'm Rebecca Hayes, and my mother was Grace Hayes." The words felt strange, like speaking in a language I'd almost forgotten. She was everything they said. Brilliant, dedicated, passionate, the most beautiful dancer I've ever seen. I paused, gathering the courage to continue. When I was 17, I got accepted to Juilliard. Full scholarship. I was going to follow in her footsteps. It was everything we'd worked for, everything she'd dreamed of for me. My voice cracked, but I pushed through. That same month, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The ballroom was so quiet, I could hear the soft hum of the chandeliers above us. The treatment wasn't fully covered by insurance. We had bills, hospital stays, experimental treatments, medications that cost thousands of dollars a month. My mother had been freelancing, so there was no safety net, no savings, just debt piling up faster than we could count it. I saw several people in the crowd, wiping their eyes. Good. Let them cry. Let them feel 1/10 of what I'd felt. So I made a choice. I turned down Juilliard. I got a job. Then 2 jobs. Then 3. Whatever I could find, whenever I could work. I served coffee. I cleaned hotel rooms. I did catering, just like tonight. I gestured at my uniform, and the irony felt bitter and perfect at once. I took care of my mother for 18 months. I helped her to the bathroom when she was too weak to walk. I held her hair when the chemo made her sick. I read to her when she couldn't sleep. I danced for her when she asked me to. Even though every movement hurt because I knew I was giving up my dreams. My voice had gotten stronger, harder. Let them hear this. Let them understand. She died on a Tuesday morning in March. I was holding her hand. The last thing she said to me was, "Dance, baby. Promise me you'll dance." And I lied to her. I said yes. I promised. A sob broke through, but I kept going. After she was gone, I couldn't do it. Every time I tried, all I could feel was her absence. The grief was too much. The studios reminded me of her. The music reminded me of her. So I stopped. I just stopped being who I was supposed to be. I looked at Nathan then. Really looked at him. He'd gone pale, his earlier swagger completely evaporated. Tonight was the first time I've danced in 10 years. And do you want to know something funny? I laughed. But there was no humor in it. You thought you were humiliating me. You thought you were putting me in my place, showing everyone that people like you are better than people like me. I stepped toward him, and he actually backed up a step. But what you actually did was give me back something I thought I'd lost forever. You forced me to remember who I was, before the grief swallowed me whole. So thank you, Mr. Ashford. Thank you for being such an asshole that you accidentally gave me the greatest gift I've received in a decade. The ballroom erupted. Not in applause this time, but in gasps and shocked exclamations. Several people were openly crying now. Others looked furious, their anger directed squarely at Nathan. Vanessa had turned away from him, her expression one of pure disgust. Professor Hartley approached me, tears streaming down his weathered face. Grace would be so proud of you, Rebecca. Not just for the dancing, but for your strength, for your courage. Maggie reached out and took my hand. Your mother was my dear friend. I see so much of her in you. I was sobbing now. Really sobbing. All the emotion I'd kept locked away for 10 years pouring out in front of everyone. But I didn't try to hide it. I let them see. Let them witness what their world did to people like us. People who had to choose between their dreams and survival. Nathan tried to step forward, his hand outstretched. Rebecca, I had no idea. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The words sounded hollow, empty. He was sorry he'd been caught, sorry he'd been exposed, but he wasn't sorry for what he'd done. Not really. I looked at him, at this man who'd tried to break me for his own entertainment, and felt something settle in my chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but something like pity. Are you though? I asked quietly. Are you sorry for trying to humiliate me? Or are you sorry that it didn't work? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Let me ask you something, Nathan. If Professor Hartley hadn't spoken up, if nobody here had known who my mother was, would you be apologizing right now? Would you feel bad about what you did? His silence was answer enough. I shook my head. You only care now, because I turned out to be somebody. Because I have a story that makes me interesting instead of just invisible. But what about all the other servers here tonight? What about Brianna, and Marcus, and Jose, and all the other people you've never looked at twice? Do they deserve dignity? Or are they still just you people? The crowd murmured in agreement. Several servers along the wall had tears streaming down their faces. Brianna was crying openly, her hand over her mouth. I forgive you, Nathan, I said, and I meant it. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I've carried enough weight for 10 years. I'm not going to carry your cruelty too. I turned away from him, then, facing the crowd instead. But forgiveness doesn't mean what you did was okay, and it doesn't mean there aren't consequences. I looked around the ballroom, at all these wealthy, powerful people who'd watched the whole thing unfold. My mother used to tell me that our worth isn't measured by our job or our bank account. It's measured by how we treat others, especially those who can't do anything for us in return. She said that real grace isn't something you can buy or learn from a teacher. It's something you either have in your heart, or you don't. I met the eyes of as many people as I could. You all came here tonight to support arts education for underprivileged children. You wrote big checks and patted yourselves on the back for being so charitable. But charity isn't just money. It's how you treat the people serving your drinks, how you speak to the staff, how you see or don't see the human beings all around you. The room was absolutely silent except for the soft sound of crying. So here's my challenge to all of you. Don't just donate money. Change how you move through the world. See people. All people. Not just the ones who might be secretly famous or secretly talented. Everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves respect. Including the woman who just served you champagne. I lowered the microphone, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the dance and the speech was draining away, leaving me shaky and hollow. But then something happened that I didn't expect. The applause started again, but this time, it was different. This time it wasn't just for the dance, it was for everything. For surviving. For surviving. For speaking truth. For refusing to be small. And as the crowd stood and clapped and cried, Professor Hartley and Maggie stood on either side of me, their hands on my shoulders, holding me up. Rebecca, Maggie said softly, I'm still choreographing on Broadway. We're doing a revival of Giselle next season. The lead role. I want you to audition. I stared at her. I haven't trained in 10 years. I'm not. You just danced a perfect waltz with no warm-up, no preparation. After a decade away, she interrupted gently. Talent like yours doesn't disappear, Rebecca. We'll get you back in shape. We'll help you train. But the gift is still there. I saw it tonight. Everyone saw it. Professor Hartley nodded. And Juilliard has a special program for returning students. Late acceptance scholarships for exceptional circumstances. I can make calls, pull some strings. It's not too late, Rebecca. It's never too late. I couldn't speak. couldn't process what they were offering. The dreams I'd buried 10 years ago were suddenly being handed back to me, impossible and real at the same time. Brianna pushed through the crowd and threw her arms around me. "Oh my God, Rebecca. Oh my God." Other members of the catering staff followed, surrounding me with hugs and tears and words of support. Marcus, who usually never showed emotion, had tears streaming down his face. "You were amazing," he kept saying. "Just amazing." And as I stood there, surrounded by people who'd become my family over the years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Across the ballroom, Nathan and Vanessa were leaving, slipping out a side door, while the attention was elsewhere. Nobody stopped them. Nobody said goodbye. The man who'd entered the evening as the most important person in the room was departing as nothing more than a cautionary tale. But I barely noticed. I was too busy being lifted up, being held, being seen. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People approached me constantly, offering business cards, phone numbers, opportunities. A woman who ran a dance studio in Chelsea offered free training space. A man whose foundation supported artists promised to help with any remaining medical debt. Someone else wanted to interview me for a documentary about dancers overcoming adversity. It was overwhelming and terrifying and absolutely perfectly wonderful. As the crowd began to thin and the event wound down, I found myself standing by the windows overlooking Central Park, staring out at the lights of the city. Professor Hartley joined me, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered me one. "You don't have to drink it," he said with a gentle smile. But after a performance like that, Grace would have insisted. I took the glass, my hands still shaking slightly. Was she really that good? My mom? Sometimes I wonder if I've built her up in my memory, made her better than she actually was. "She was better," Professor Hartley said simply. "I taught dance for 45 years, Rebecca. I saw thousands of students. Grace Hayes was one in a generation. Maybe one in a lifetime." He paused, looking at me with eyes that had seen so much. "But you, my dear, might be even better." I shook my head immediately. "No, I'm not. I'm not saying you're more technically skilled, though you could be, with proper training. I'm saying you have something she didn't have." He touched his chest over his heart. "Pain, loss, survival. When you dance, it's not just beautiful, it's necessary. Like you're dancing to stay alive." Tears spilled over again. I was so tired of crying, but I couldn't seem to stop. "She would be so proud of you," Professor Hartley said softly. "Not just for tonight, for all of it, for sacrificing your dreams to care for her, for surviving the grief, for staying kind even when the world was cruel." Grace always said that true dancers don't just perform with their bodies, they perform with their souls. You proved that tonight. We stood in silence for a while, sipping champagne and watching the city lights blur through my tears. "What happens now?" I finally asked. "Now," Professor Hartley smiled. "Now you decide. You can go back to catering tomorrow, pretend tonight never happened, keep living small. Or, or, or you can be brave one more time. You can audition for Maggie. You can apply for the Juilliard program. You can take back the life that was stolen from you 10 years ago." I thought about my 3 jobs, my tiny apartment in Queens, my carefully constructed invisible existence, safe, predictable, small. Then I thought about my mother's last words. "Dance, baby. Promise me you'll dance." I'd lied to her then. I'd broken that promise every single day for 10 years. But maybe it wasn't too late to keep it after all. "I want to try," I whispered. "I'm terrified, but I want to try." Professor Hartley squeezed my shoulder. "Good. Being terrified means it matters. The things that don't scare us aren't worth doing." 2 months later, I stood in a rehearsal studio in Midtown Manhattan, dressed in practice clothes that actually fit, my hair pulled back in a proper bun, my feet in point shoes I thought I'd never wear again. Maggie was running me through choreography for Giselle, and my body ached in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Every muscle screamed. My feet were covered in blisters, despite the toe pads. I was pretty sure I'd cried at least once during every practice session for the last 8 weeks. And I'd never been happier. I still worked at the catering company, but just enough to pay my bills while I trained. Several of the wealthy patrons from that night had made good on their offers, helping with expenses and providing a small stipend. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Juilliard had accepted me into their returning students program. I'd start taking evening classes in the fall, while continuing to work with Maggie during the day. It would be brutal, exhausting, everything I'd avoided for 10 years. I couldn't wait. Brianna came to visit sometimes, bringing coffee and sitting on the floor while I practiced. "You know you're basically a celebrity now, right?" she'd said last week, showing me her phone where someone had posted the video from that night. It had gone viral, millions of views, thousands of comments. I didn't read most of them. I didn't need to. I knew what I'd done, what it meant. And that was enough. I'd heard through the grapevine that Nathan had left the city for a while, weathering the social media storm somewhere private. Vanessa had broken off their engagement. The Children's Arts Foundation had returned his donation and publicly distanced themselves from him. His reputation in New York society circles was, to put it mildly, damaged. I didn't feel good about it, exactly. But I didn't feel bad either. He'd made his choices. Now he had to live with the consequences, just like the rest of us. One evening, I was leaving the studio late when I saw someone waiting outside. A young woman, maybe 19 or 20, wearing a Starbucks uniform. "Are you Rebecca Hayes?" she asked shyly. "Yes," I said, suddenly self-conscious in my sweaty practice clothes. "I saw your video, the one from the plaza." She bit her lip, looking down. "I'm a server too, work 2 jobs to pay for community college. And I wanted to tell you that what you said, that night, about dignity and seeing people, it meant a lot to me." Tears pricked my eyes again. "Thank you. That means more than you know. I started dance classes," the girl continued in a rush. "Just a beginner class at the YMCA. Nothing fancy, but I always wanted to try, and after seeing you, I thought, maybe it's not too late." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "It's never too late. I promise." She left with a huge smile and I stood there on the sidewalk, watching her walk away, feeling something huge and warm expanding in my chest. This was why it mattered. Not the viral video or the opportunities or even the chance to dance on Broadway. It was this. One person finding courage because they saw someone else be brave. I thought about my mother, about the promises I'd made and broken and was finally keeping, about the decade I'd spent hiding, surviving, being small, about one cruel man who'd accidentally given me the push I needed to remember who I was. My phone buzzed. A text from Maggie. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. We're running the full Act 2. Bring your A game." I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation, already mentally preparing for another day of beautiful, excruciating work. As I walked toward the subway, I passed a storefront window and caught my reflection. I looked different than I had 2 months ago. Older, maybe. Definitely more tired. But also more alive. More real. More me. That night at the plaza had taught me something that I'd carry for the rest of my life. Our worth isn't defined by how others see us or treat us. It's not measured in bank accounts or job titles or social status. It's defined by what we choose to do when we're given the chance to be either cruel or kind, either small or brave. Nathan Ashford had chosen cruelty. He'd chosen to be small, despite all his money and power and privilege. I'd chosen to be brave, not perfectly, not without fear, but I'd chosen to stand up, to speak my truth, to take back the life I thought I'd lost. And in doing so, I'd learned that the things we lose aren't always gone forever. Sometimes they're just waiting for us to be ready to reclaim them. My mother used to say that dance wasn't just movement, it was a way of speaking when words weren't enough. a way of expressing joy and grief and love and pain all at once, a way of being fully, completely human. For 10 years I'd been silent. But I wasn't silent anymore. I was dancing again. And this time, I wasn't going to stop. The Friday before auditions, I went to the cemetery where my mother was buried. I hadn't been in years. The guilt of that weighed on me as I navigated the paths between the headstones, clutching a bouquet of yellow roses, her favorite. Her grave was simple. Grace Hayes, beloved mother and artist. The dates of her too short life. I sat down on the grass beside it, not caring that the ground was damp. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice breaking immediately. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come back. I'm sorry for so many things." The wind rustled through the trees. A bird sang somewhere nearby. The city noise faded into a distant hum. "I broke my promise to you. I didn't dance. I couldn't. It hurt too much. Every time I tried, all I could feel was losing you." The tears came, as they always did when I thought about her. But something happened. Something impossible and terrible and perfect. I told her about that night. About Nathan and the waltz, and Professor Hartley. About Maggie and the audition, and Juilliard. About standing in that ballroom, and finally letting go of all the grief I'd carried for so long. "I'm scared," I admitted. "I'm so scared that I'll fail, that I'm not good enough anymore, that I wasted too many years, that I'm too old, too late, too broken." I traced her name on the headstone with shaking fingers. "But I'm going to try. I'm going to audition on Monday. I'm going to take those classes. I'm going to dance again. Really dance the way you taught me to. With my whole heart. Even if I'm terrified." A squirrel ran across the path. Clouds moved across the sun, creating patterns of light and shadow on the grass. "I miss you so much, it still feels like I can't breathe sometimes. But I think I'm finally starting to understand what you meant. That last thing you said to me." I closed my eyes, remembering that Tuesday morning, the hospital room, her hand in mine. "You weren't just telling me to dance, you were telling me to live. To not let the grief destroy everything beautiful. To honor you by becoming who you always knew I could be." The wind picked up, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I smelled her perfume. Chanel number 5. She wore it every day of her life. "I love you, Mom. I'll always love you. And I promise, really promise this time, that I'll dance. I'll dance for both of us." I left the roses on her grave and walked back to the subway with tears streaming down my face. But they weren't only sad tears anymore. They were grateful tears. Release tears. Tears that washed away the last of the walls I'd built around my heart. Monday came too fast and not fast enough. I stood outside the audition studio in the Manhattan Center Studios building, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. There were 30 other women there, all younger, all probably with perfect recent training records, none of them with a decade-long gap in their resumes. They stretched and chatted, confident and beautiful in their dance clothes. I almost turned around and left. But then I thought about my mother, about that night at the plaza, about the girl in the Starbucks uniform, who'd started taking classes because I'd been brave for 5 minutes. I thought about Professor Hartley saying, "Being terrified means it matters." I walked through the door. The audition was brutal. 3 hours of combinations, technique work, and cold readings of scenes from the ballet. My body protested every movement. I could feel how out of shape I was compared to the other dancers, how my extensions weren't as high, my turns not as clean. But I also felt something they didn't. I felt necessity. Every movement wasn't just a step, it was a reclamation. Every turn was another year of grief spinning away. Every leap was a refusal to stay small. When they asked us to perform Giselle's mad scene, the moment when the character loses everything and dances herself to death, I didn't have to act. I let every ounce of pain from the last 10 years pour into those movements. The loss of my mother. The sacrifice of my dreams. The years of being invisible. When I finished, the room was silent. Maggie was sitting at the table with two other people I didn't know. Her eyes were red. "Thank you, Rebecca," she said quietly. "We'll be in touch." I left without looking at the other dancers, went straight home, and slept for 14 hours. The call came 3 days later. "Rebecca, it's Maggie. The role is yours." I dropped the phone. Brianna, who'd come over to keep me company during the wait, picked it up. She said, "Yes, right? Oh my God. She's crying. Is she crying happy or crying sad?" "Happy," I managed to choke out. "Crying happy. You're going to be on Broadway." Brianna was screaming now, jumping up and down. "You're going to be on freaking Broadway." It didn't feel real. Even when the contract came, even when rehearsals started, even when my name appeared in playbill for the first time, it felt like a dream I might wake up from at any moment. Opening night arrived in September. 6 months after that night at the plaza, Professor Hartley came, sitting in the front row with a bouquet of yellow roses. Brianna came with half the catering staff, all dressed up and looking so proud I cried during curtain call. Maggie was there, of course, and dozens of others. People who'd seen the video, who'd heard the story, who wanted to witness what happened next. The theater was packed. As I stood backstage in my costume waiting for my entrance cue, I thought about every moment that had led to this. The grief, the sacrifice, the decade of silence, the dance that had broken me open, the truth that had set me free. The music started, the curtain rose, and I danced. I danced for my mother, for the girl I'd been, for the woman I'd become, for everyone who'd ever been told they were too late, too broken, too ordinary to chase their dreams. I danced with my whole heart, just like she'd taught me to. And when the final curtain fell, and the audience stood to applaud, I stood there in the spotlight and felt complete for the first time in 10 years. Later, after the show, after the backstage celebrations, after the flowers and the congratulations and the champagne, I stood alone in my dressing room. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, at my stage makeup and costume, at the woman I'd somehow become despite everything. My phone buzzed, a text from a number I didn't recognize. "I saw the show tonight. You were extraordinary. I'm sorry for what I did. I hope you can forgive me someday. Nathan." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I deleted it without responding. Some people deserved second chances. Some people deserved forgiveness. But some people just needed to be left in the past where they belonged. I changed out of my costume, wiped off my makeup, and stepped out into the New York night. The marquee above the theater glowed against the dark sky, my name in lights among the cast. I pulled out my phone and took a picture, sending it to the only person I wished could see it. I kept my promise, Mom. I'm dancing. The city lights blurred through my tears as I walked toward the subway. Another person in the crowd, invisible again, in the best possible way. But this time, I knew who I was under the anonymity. This time, being invisible was a choice, not a cage. That night at the plaza had taught me the most important lesson of my life. We all have value, whether anyone sees it or not. We all have worth, whether anyone acknowledges it or not. And sometimes the people who try to diminish us are actually giving us the greatest gift, the push we need to stop hiding and start living. Nathan Ashford had thought he was putting me in my place, but what he'd actually done was remind me that I'd never belonged there in the first place. My place wasn't serving champagne to people who didn't see me. My place was on stage, in the spotlight, doing what I was born to do, not because of who my mother was, because of who I was. The subway rumbled beneath my feet as I descended the stairs, leaving the theater behind. Tomorrow, I'd do it all again. Another show, another audience, another chance to tell a story through movement and music. But tonight, I was just Rebecca Hayes, daughter of Grace, survivor, dancer, and for the first time in 10 years, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Every story carries within it an echo of our shared humanity. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone special. Leave us a comment about what you felt, and subscribe to join us for more soul-reaching stories. Because every life tells a story that deserves to be heard. See you next time.